Legacy Precious Metals is the company that I trust to give you good and patient counsel for investing in your retirement. The Biden administration has caused a financial crisis, and they have no clue how to fix it. Oil prices have skyrocketed, and when oil prices go up, not only do your expenses go up, but the cost of transportation and shipping spikes, leading the prices of goods to rise. And we are already seeing record inflation. That's the last thing that we need. Our economy is in trouble, and you need to take steps to protect yourself. If all your money is tied up in stocks, bonds, and traditional markets, you may be vulnerable. So gold is one of the very best ways to protect your retirement. No matter what happens, you own your own gold. It's real, it's physical, and it's always been valuable since the dawn of time. Call Legacy Precious Metals today at 866-528-1903 or visit them online at legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com, where you can download the free investor's guide. You can also go to my Facebook page, Jenna Ellis. I am a public figure on Facebook, and I just posted yesterday a really great interview with the president of Legacy Precious Metals, who is discussing why you need to start your retirement account even if you're in your 20s or 30s. There is always a great time to protect your retirement and invest, just like you want to protect your health over the long term. So go to Legacy Precious Metals at legacypminvestments.com or call 866-528-1903.
As a constitutional law attorney, former senior legal advisor, and personal counsel to President Donald J. Trump, Jenna Ellis believes in the rule of law and the importance of integrity in our elections. And she's ready to tackle the big cultural and legal issues facing America. This is the Jenna Ellis Show. Here is your host, Jenna Ellis.
Hello, friends, and welcome to the Jenna Ellis Show. I'm Jenna Ellis, and I want to get straight to our guest, Raheem Kassam, who, of course, is the editor-in-chief of the National Pulse and has a great Substack and wrote a phenomenal piece yesterday that was pushing back on the idea that this was just a red trickle instead of a red wave, and also addressing, let's face it, the giant elephant in the room, which is Donald Trump, and that everyone seems to be blaming Donald Trump for the results of the midterm election. So, Raheem, overview of why you pushed back on what I agree is an insane narrative.
Yeah, thanks for letting me talk about this, Jenna, because I really look at these things from a forensic perspective. There will be a lot of people on either side who look at it from an emotional perspective. And so let's pull apart the certain things that we've been hearing over the last 48 hours and why we've been hearing them. Number one, the big thing is there was no red wave. It was only a red trickle, if that. And Republicans should be embarrassed and start the blame game. And of course, the corporate media wants the blame to lay in the lap of President Donald J. Trump. The problem with that narrative is twofold. Number one, they delayed the results that are still coming in, that will still lead to the Republicans taking the House, probably taking the Senate, Kari Lake probably winning in Arizona, Adam Laxalt probably winning in Nevada. And if you had had all of those results also come out that night, with the champagne bottles popping and the confetti streaming and all of the wonderful election things that you Americans like to do, you know, we just disappeared out of the pub after an election. But there would have been an undeniable red wave that night. And the talking heads on CNN and the newspaper columnists the next day would have had nothing to write about except their own tears. So how did they do that? Well, of course, who is the Secretary of State in Arizona that is responsible for overseeing the way that the election is conducted? Oh, that's right. It's Kari Lake's opponent, Katie Hobbs. And we're several days now after that election, and we are still without clue as to when we will get a firm result there. We throw this phrase around all the time, but I really want people to internalize it. What we're looking at in Arizona today, and especially in Maricopa County, is an election process that would embarrass Bangladesh, right? This is not something that Americans should be proud of, and it's certainly not something that the media should be using to crow against Donald Trump with. If anything, it tells the public this. Something is drastically wrong wherever Democrats run elections. And we've known that for some time now. You especially have known it for some time now, Jenna. The other interesting part of all of this is, you know who isn't blaming Donald Trump? The 93% of endorsed candidates that won Donald Trump's endorsement success rate is above 90%. It may be 92% tomorrow or the day after. It may be 94 or 95% when the other elections come in, finally, in 3 months' time or whenever they will. But that is an endorsement success rate that we have just never seen before, and that nobody else in the Republican Party could even begin to suggest that they would have that level of endorsement success rate if they did things the same way and if they were the same target as Donald Trump is. And those two things, I think, really need to be internalized before we get on to, cui bono, right? Who benefits from this blame game for the 93% success that's being thrown at Donald Trump? Well, it's the people who actually fought races that didn't work out too well, the McLeadership, what I call the McLeadership, McCarthy, McDaniel, McConnell, where they threw money against Republican candidates, where they actually held hand in hand with Democrats in some places to stop somebody like Doug Mastriano or others. There are other seats, Sabatini, and so on and so forth. Those are the people that don't want you asking questions about how those elections were conducted and what culpability they have in the places that we didn't see great Republican successes in. And the other part of that is which media organizations are crowing about this. It's the two largest corporate media organizations in the country, the Murdoch and the Bezos organizations. These are the ones who are full-throatedly saying, actually, it's really time we started considering somebody a little bit more moderate than Donald Trump. Oh, I wonder why the corporate media conglomerate behemoths would take an opportunity like that in a situation where we don't even have all of the results in and try and spin a false narrative against the guy that is inevitable. Donald Trump is inevitable. That is the thing that we have to internalize here, that whether you're Jeff Bezos or whether you're Rupert Murdoch or however many billions of dollars you have, when you have that level of momentum behind you and you have that level of popular support, even in a presumptive Republican primary, if it happened today, Donald Trump would overwhelmingly win. Well, no wonder they're telling this. And what this is, just like everything else we've seen over the last couple of, well, it's been a long time now, 6 or 7 years, Russiagate. I mean, I heard there were nuclear secrets on the floor at Mar-a-Lago. I was in Mar-a-Lago the other day. I didn't see any. But all of these lies and lies and lies again, this is just the latest one. There was a red wave. The red wave is still cascading down on the shores of CNN HQ. And this is their cope mechanism. I say to people on the political right, don't buy it for a second.
And that is so reasonably articulated, Raheem. And I think so wise for people to just take a step back. And yet you're seeing a lot of the base, and especially the people who would love to see Donald Trump ousted by Ron DeSantis, who frankly hasn't even hinted or suggested that he's going to actually put his hat into the 2024 ring. He may not. There are a lot of pros and cons to that, but there are a lot of people who are the NeverTrumpers, even on the right, and the establishment hacks that would love to see Donald Trump just get out of the way for whatever reason. And I love the fact that you call them the McLeadership. I'm actually going to commandeer that term because I think it sounds exactly like a really poorly produced Grey's Anatomy episode. So I love it. And you're completely right that this is all about drawing lines in the appropriate places where we need to, as conservatives in America, regardless of what you think of Donald Trump versus DeSantis or whatever, we need to recognize that the McLeadership are the ones that are genuinely to blame for Donald Trump's success rate only being at around 93%. So what do you say to these people who kind of just go with wherever the wind blows on Twitter, and they are very probably well-meaning patriots who love Trump and DeSantis, but now they're just so tired of the chaos and they're buying into this latest phenomenon that is being perpetuated by the media. That's just the latest Trump is over, Trump is over, Trump is over.
Well, this is, they have my sympathies because they are under a deluge of false information day in and day out. And, it's easy for us to forget that ordinary people who are raising their kids and doing their day jobs and running to the store and trying to afford the unaffordable groceries and gas and have all these other concerns in their lives right now don't have necessarily the same time and ability as I do to dig into the detail and the depth of these sorts of things. And so, I can't get mad at people for that. I am extremely sympathetic to the fact that there is a cascade of false information landing on people's heads every day. But it's about sobriety, right? It's about looking at the information as it really is. And I don't think anybody in the corporate media world right now has put the number, 93% of successful endorsements by President Trump, victors in this election cycle. I don't think anybody has put that on their chyrons. So it's almost hard for the general public to glean that information from anywhere else. I don't expect people themselves to whip out an Excel spreadsheet and start totting up the calculations when they get home from work. So it falls on us to make the academic case here. And by the way, I want to get something out of the way on this as well. Two things can be simultaneously true. Ron DeSantis can be a fantastic Republican politician, governor of Florida. He can be a fantastic president of the United States someday. I told that to him when I first interviewed him in 2015. I think I may have been the first person to ever tell that to him, that he would make a great president. So maybe a lot of this is my fault.
It's totally your fault. Yeah.
that can be true at the same time as 2024 is still the time for Donald Trump and still the time for people around Donald Trump who learned so much over the last decade that we're coming up on now, and how to actually take the fight to the other side in earnest. You don't want to hit that reset button right now and bring in a whole raft of new people and introduce a whole new learning curve. And then you have 4 years of just getting up to speed on everything like we had during the first Trump term, and then again try and hand this thing over. The other thing that can be true at the same time is that Ron DeSantis may well choose to be on that debate stage in the Republican primary, and that may well not be a bad thing for anybody. It gets him the experience that he needs to get in the big time, because honestly, if anybody goes back and they watch his debate with Charlie Crist, as I did, he wasn't actually particularly tough in that debate, and you shouldn't struggle against Charlie Crist. But Ron DeSantis needs a little bit more experience at things like that, and those Republican primary debate stages may be the experience he needs. And Donald Trump will need sharpening up a little bit. He'll need a few barbs and witticisms and punches and counter punches so that when he gets up on the debate stage again with the Democrat opponent ahead of the next presidential election, he's even more sharp than we usually are used to seeing him. So I don't want people to think that necessarily this is a one-way or t'other choice. This is about what is complementary for the MAGA movement in general, because if we buy the division, and I am going to start calling it the Murdoch division, because if you look at the pages of the Wall Street Journal and you look at the narratives being peddled on their corporate news television programs, it is really coming from these corporate billionaire classes who really want to avoid the America First agenda again. That we have to start calling a spade a spade. That's where this is coming from. That's where it started. And this is where it ends. I call it McLeadership for a reason. It's not just because it's McCarthy, McDaniel, and McConnell, and that's very funny and nice and punny, right? But it's also time for us to go through and develop the McLeadership $1 million menu. And let's show where they've deployed $1 million against MAGA candidates all across the country for the last 6 or 7 years. Because that list will infuriate the ordinary people who send checks and cash and click that donate link in their emails to the NRCC and the NRSC and the RNC time and time again. And then their cash is deployed against the very same candidates that they wish were on the ballots to represent them and that they wish were in Congress representing them. So let's do it. Let's put up the McLeadership $1 million menu.
I love it. I love it. And that type of accountability is exactly what the GOP needs, because they are suffering from an identity crisis between the McLeadership versus the MAGA Inc. and the America First, which I love that you are one of the few voices, Raheem, that is actually suggesting that we can simultaneously love both Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. And we don't have to make those distinctions and differentiations in terms of 2024 right now. I mean, primaries are there for a reason. But also, it was interesting to me looking at election night, and I flipped back and forth between, Newsmax and Fox primarily, and obviously a few of the other unmentionables of the left, just to see kind of their narratives and outrages, like all of us do, so that we can see kind of how is this being covered. And no one, particularly on Fox News on this panel, when you saw who they put up as their election night coverage, so-called experts and pundits, Karl Rove was among them. And not one person, even the alleged journalists on this panel, like Brett Baer and Martha McCallum, none of them confronted him, asking him about his personal investment involvement. And did he suggest that? Not at all. I mean, he acted like he had no vested interest here. He didn't have full disclosure. At least Kellyanne Conway, in talking about the Pennsylvania gubernatorial race, said, and, for full disclosure, I supported, different candidate. And also when she was talking about the Oz Fetterman race. So that was at least honest. But you don't have this, like you said, $1 million menu from the McLeadership that is being put front and center, or even just disclosed in a throwaway kind of caveat to a lot of these discussions. And so for the average American who's looking at this, they're seeing a lot of these America First candidates fail because all of the Bezos and the Murdochs want to shine the light only on the negatives. They don't want to look at the wins. And so where do you think the fault lines are between truly getting out this information on alternative platforms like yours and mine, and some of the other coverage that journalists and genuine America First people care about? Why is it that people are still going to some of these networks and believing what they're saying?
Habit, laziness, complacency, ease of access. They are foisted upon people on a day-to-day basis. Billions of dollars of ad spending goes into, you may not like the Washington Post. I certainly don't like the Washington Post. But every day the Washington Post gets delivered to my house. I don't subscribe to the Washington Post. I have told them to stop delivering me the Washington Post, but they still deliver me the Washington Post because it's negligible for them, right? To deliver to me so that they know that, their information is landing with somebody like me that is, an influence generator, and they want to peddle that further. And they do this all the time. I mean, there's a reason that certain papers, USA Today, are given away en masse for free in hotels all around the country. There is a reason that CNN likes to be, on the background in every airport, across the Western world. I'm working on a Substack right now. It's probably a while away, but it's about all of these posters and leaflets and flyers and bill stickers that you see routinely around Capitol Hill that explicitly call for far left policy agendas. You never see a Republican bill poster up on Capitol Hill, but you see left-wing ones everywhere all the time. And sometimes they are threatening against right-wingers, and sometimes they are, basically full communist, Marxist agenda, Green New Deal, all of that stuff, posters. And it's all a matter of subliminality, right? It's all a matter of capturing you when you're least on guard, when your guard is down. And that's what I think a lot of these guys do. And they do it in the Chiron on their television programs, very sneaky way that they sneak information into your head without you necessarily, studying it and reading it and going through it word by word. And again, they do it through what you said, which is a great point, the lies of omission that they tell you. That when Karl Rove is up there going, oh, well, of course, I am just this, neutral arbiter of election information, and I've done this for 50 years, and you should really listen to me. He's actually got not just a political interest, he has a major vested financial interest in half of the things that they ask him to talk about on that network. And fundamentally believe that there should be some level of expectation from the audience, almost a self-regulatory system, whereby the audience makes it very clear to that network that, hey, if you lie to me about this guest that you're putting on air, I am going to turn the television off. I am going to cancel my cable subscription, and you are not going to get the carriage fees anymore. And that takes that one little bit of extra effort, right? And again, it falls on people like you and I to tell people how to do that, to provide them with a one-click ability and opportunity to do that. Maybe it's somebody's email address, maybe it's a web form somewhere, but these networks need to know that they can't keep getting away with lying like this. The other reason I think people keep going back to these places is it's high quality, right? It's extremely glossy, and everybody's got, so much, they use an entire can of hairspray for me when I go into some of these studios. And it looks good. And Americans especially, they really like polished, shiny products. And so I think there's an element of that we need to get over as well. Production values at these places are way more expensive than you and I could necessarily afford doing these things for ourselves. And even though technology is helping us catch up with those guys, it's still gonna, there's still always going to be that little bit. Now listen, credit where it's due. There are banks and banks of real reporters who work in these corporate organizations, but they're not the reporters you see, right? They're not the Jim Acostas. They're not the people in front of the television cameras. They're the people behind the scenes who are actually watching second by second on the Secretary of State websites to see when the new results are being logged, and they're taking that 0.1% change and pushing it onto the front page of the New York Times website. That is not a fun task. That is a totally thankless task, and you probably don't even get a byline for that. So again, it's not to write off everybody in these buildings, but the general structure, the machinations, and the overarching goal of these groups is to lie to you. So my advice is do what I do and watch Jenna Ellis instead.
Well, thank you for that. And I hope that people will watch and will go to these alternative platforms to get the unfiltered and the hopefully non-biased, or at least honest in our bias perspective, because that's what a lot of what I saw of the election night aftermath and the coverage and the opinion and the analysis of it, Raheem, was just that people were filtering it through their own preferred bias and their own preferred outcome. I mean, it's the same thing as forum shopping in litigation, where if you know a venue that is going to be more biased, likely toward your preferred outcome, then you would rather play in that venue, in that forum, than go into a separate jurisdiction. And that's what these cable news networks do. They have forums that are friendly to their particular bias. And these reporters that you mentioned, they're not interested in necessarily the decision making, and they're not the decision makers, rather. And so, you have a lot of really good people, but they're not the ones who are actually making the calls, like what Paul Ryan is on the board of the Murdoch Foundation with Fox News and some of these other really interestingly biased people. And you also have to ask yourself why only certain people, like the Sean Hannitys of the world, that when they're making suggestions and they are making these types of comments, what is his bias? I mean, I have been very open in, my own, in terms of bias. I love President Trump. I worked for him. I'm not going to disclose anything against the rules of ethics, for example, but that doesn't mean that I'm not going to have my own opinions and ongoing. I'm not going to tell you honestly what I think, or tell you, here's my bias because I worked for him. So I still have an emotional connection, those kinds of things that I would love to hear from members of media who not only may have emotional connection, but more importantly, they have financial connection. And that's really the key. If those things, you mentioned the $1 million McLeadership menu, and I love that kind of descriptor, because really it's the financial vested interests of all of these network talking heads that is not disclosed that really should be. So as we look at, it's not just campaign finance, it's not all of these other things that certainly we can talk about, but the propaganda media is a really, really big beast. But I want to also ask you a question, going back to kind of your initial framework of all of this. And the mainstream media obviously poking the bear, and they're wanting to pit this fight between Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis Well, Ron DeSantis, wisely, in my opinion, is just not saying anything at the moment. He's not giving into that temptation. Donald Trump is. And, I've said for a long time, I've been his lawyer, not his conscience. There are a lot of people that are very upset with the way that Trump has responded to this and how he's possibly playing into that narrative. So do you think he's being wise, or do you think that, hey, it's Trump, it's ultimately not going to hurt him?
Well, I think he thinks he's doing what is necessary, and I'll explain. And I want to come back to a couple of things you mentioned there as well, just really quickly before I do. Number one, if this was going on in reverse, what we saw in the last couple of months during this election cycle, these corporate news outlets that we discuss would right now be running entire packages on the influence of the foreign-owned social media outlet that led so many young people to vote a certain way. And yet we haven't heard a peep out of that. No analysis, nothing in the last, several days. And I doubt we will. But the Chinese Communist Party actually owns a significant part of TikTok's parent company, ByteDance. And TikTok was used massively in this election to peddle left-wing messages in particular. And I think that's something that we need to push on as well. And back to the DeSantis point, I think it's really interesting. And I think it's really interesting because I actually did a podcast about this dichotomy that people were having internally back in January of this year. And people back then were saying to me, why are you pretending that there's going to be some fight between DeSantis and Trump? You're making things up to try and get podcast listeners. Listen, my podcast listeners know for a fact that I haven't done a podcast in several months. I couldn't care less, right, about the size of the download audience of that show. I usually do it just to get things off my chest. And that was something that I did back in January. And it comes down to this in terms of why Trump is engaging in the way he's engaging. It's very simple. Ron DeSantis's people, his supporters, and people within the broader Ron DeSantis camp and movement are the ones who are happily promoting this stuff, putting it out there, talking to reporters, talking to journalists, talking to influencers, nudging people along to talk about the end of Trump. They are doing that. I have text messages from people in those world who are doing that and trying to bring me on the DeSantis train. Doesn't even sound as good. But Trump, when Trump people try to brief things into the media, guess what happens? You know what happens. They don't run it. They leave things out. They lie about the statements, and they run their own, crazy stuff that they single source, like Maggie Haberman's thing about Trump blaming Melania for Dr. Oz and all of this stuff, right? They just flat out don't do for Trump what they do for more moderate Republicans. And I don't use more moderate about DeSantis in that instance as a pejorative, even though I usually use moderate as a pejorative. What I mean is he is perceived as a more moderate version of Trump. And so I don't want anybody to think that I'm attacking here. This is very basic analysis. If you're Jason Miller or whoever is around Trump on a daily basis now, and you go to somebody from The Guardian, or you go to somebody from CNN, or you go to somebody from the New York Times, and you say, hey, by the way, just in reference to this DeSantis stuff that's going on now, here's our line on it. 99 times out of 100, they are either not running the line, or they are, cutting it, chopping it up, running part of it. It happens to me even when they ask me for comment in papers. Imagine how it happens to Trump. So the only way Trump can get his, slaps back to a world that is already briefing against him is to do it himself. And I'm sorry that it's ugly, and I'm sorry that it's messy, and I'm sorry that some people see it as unbecoming. But think back to the Trump of 2014-15 going into that election. I mean, there were a lot of things that we thought were unbecoming and ungentlemanly and whatever. And at the end of the day, weren't we so happy that they were? Weren't we so happy that the barbs and the jabs and all of that managed to cut through this silly, non-existent notion of, presidential behavior and professionalism, when what they really wanted out of him, what they were really trying to get him to do, was shut the hell up. So I'm glad that President Trump still exists. Am I glad that there's this fight going on between these two men? You know what? It was natural. It was always going to happen. They're both incredibly talented people. They both want the best for their country, and they're both at in tip-top form, right? So it's going to happen. I still think Trump's got it. I still think Trump's the guy, but I don't wish DeSantis any ill will whatsoever.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with that final point. I think that right now, still, the nomination is Trump's if he decides to announce and pursue it. But, DeSantis is also great. And isn't it great that we have a wide bench, that we're sitting here parsing the difference between two really amazing candidates? I mean, that's so much better than it was in 2016. That's so much better than the Democrats.
It's such a good point you're making, because while we're talking about, well, no, my guy's better, the Democrats are going, well, my guy's less worse.
Yeah,
think about that.
I mean, look at John Fetterman, who they are propping up. Look at the people who lost, the Stacey Abrams and the Beto O'Rourke's, that they spent $200 million trying to get them elected. Those are their people. They have an old dementia-riddled idiot in the Oval Office and a cackling witch as the second. I mean, this is just sad for them. And so I'm grateful that we have Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. And I think your point is so excellently made, that Donald Trump has to do his PR himself, because I mean, in the years that I worked for him, the exact same thing would happen, where I would get calls from media outlets, here, what's your comment? Even if I gave them one sentence, they would parse it, or they would, put parentheticals around it. They'd frame it. They would shape it in any way to twist it out of proportion. When I would go, the few times they let me on some of the leftist networks, there was once during the aftermath of the 2020 election, I was on MSNBC with Ari Fleischer. He was talking over me, and they actually lowered my microphone to make me look like I was the one trying to talk over him, and he had to hush the wild, crazy Trump supporting attorney so that he could get the actual facts and the points out. And these are the kinds of manipulation tactics that they do all the time. And this is exactly why Donald Trump is not on Twitter right now, because they knew that when he was able to speak for himself, he would control the narrative and he would cut through all of the BS. He's doing that on Truth Social and through some of his other statements, but incredibly, but not unpredictably, the media doesn't want to cover that, and they want to pretend that his Truth Social posts are not nearly as newsworthy as when they were just tweets, as if that changes the difference coming from the person, what platform it's on. But going back, Raheem, also to what we've been talking about with some of these other broadcasters, I think it's also an important point when we talk about vested interest to also talk about where our paycheck is coming from. Because also, there is a wide difference between what you can say when you are a spokesperson, or in my case, a lawyer for a certain client on a certain issue. What I'm able to say, I'm not speaking for myself. But when I'm on this platform and I am speaking for myself, you're getting unbiased Jenna's opinion. But when we look at some of these other people from the Trump administration that have then gone into some of these major networks, don't ever forget, they are now being paid by the Murdoch Corporation, and their entire public figure television existence is now not because they have a Chiron as a former Trump whatever, but because they are now a Fox News or a CNN, or in Alyssa Farah's case, The View contributor. And that's where their ultimate loyalty lies, because that's where their paycheck is coming from.
I just have to correct you on something there. Alyssa Farah is not a contributor for The View. She is a contributor for Satan. Okay, like that
Fair,
is what she is doing.
Corrected. Absolutely.
That is whose lucre Alyssa Farah has opted to take here. I totally agree. I think it's and one of the things that interests me as well is that I will always try my hardest to accept an invitation onto a hostile show. They will never do the same in return. They would never, Jim Acosta would never come and sit with me for a National Pulse podcast. Maggie Haberman would not respond to me for questions I had about her book ahead of when I was doing a Substack about it. Bob Woodward would never allow us to scrutinize his journalistic integrity while they feel that it is within their right to do it to me. Well, it can only work both ways. It can't work one way. And it goes back to the point where you sometimes you give them comments and they only run a little part of it. You take it to its fullest extent. I like to think about it as a joke in the following ways. They could come to you and say, hey, you're a spokesman for Donald Trump. We're wondering about political violence and wondering if the president has any statement on that. And it could say something like, Donald Trump does not condone the murder of Democrats. And they would run, murder Democrats, a Trump person said. That's
right.
How ludicrous it's become now. So yes, we're seeing a lot more of people hiving off into their little media corners nowadays. But the good news is there's plenty of options out there now, right? You can go on Rumble. You don't have to go on YouTube. You can go on Truth. You don't have to go on Twitter. You can go into a million different places. And by the way, we're just the forerunners of this, right? Like, I'm constantly reminded by younger people, especially on Capitol Hill now, that I'm not the future anymore. It was only about 10 years ago that people were coming to me and saying, oh, he's a good kid. Look at this guy. He's an up and comer. Now people call me sir, or Mr. Kassam. And I'm just like, oh, wow, there's a whole generation right, like immediately beneath me that is creating so much more content, and honestly, so much better content and better produced content and higher quality and all of that. And that's so fantastic.
It is. And, and just to highlight one of the great points that you made earlier, so many Americans want our content to be Hollywood level produced with the full can of hairspray and the lights and the shiny and whatever. But I love that one of the very few, but one of the silver linings of the pandemic era was that we saw kind of the raw and the unfiltered, that we can actually still do television and have actually better produced content, and kind of have this whole podcast alternative world because we had to for a while. And so people aren't expecting quite that same level when they're looking at something like the Joe Rogan Experience, or, even here where I'm literally sitting in my living room, just having this conversation, because people should care much more about the content than they do the way it's packaged. And but we're Americans. I mean, this is why the, McMenu is literally our example, because people care about the packaging rather than the nutrition involved in literally everything from what we eat and what we consume to what we consume in the media. And hopefully that's changing. And hopefully with this new era of being able to stream our content, to be able to platform a lot of different people, including even on Twitter, hopefully, we're putting this into the better trajectory. But, what about a lot of the young people, 30 and younger, the Gen Zers that voted Democrat? What are we not doing to reach them with this type of content?
Well, there's two things we're not doing, and we unfortunately we have to pick from one of these two. We're not doing TikTok, and we're not banning TikTok, right? And look, it's a foreign influence tool used by the Chinese Communist Party, and they put their fingers on the algorithmic scales on TikTok, and they look at your reactions back through your front-facing camera, and they can access just about everything on your phone. And I understand that other apps do that too. I'm not that much of a boomer yet. But at the same time, this is a tyrannical, oppressive, communist regime. The other side of the world, it's genocidal. It doesn't care about you and your data and your pronouns. It cares about wholesale ownership of the globe, of global politics, of global trade, of everything that totalitarian regimes have to rely on to stay in power. And in using TikTok, while you might just be, I'm talking directly to TikTok users now, while you might just be one person, you think, oh, what could my influence do? But what if 1,000 of you suddenly just stop using it? What if 10,000 of you suddenly stop using? What if there was a whole wave of people that said, you know what, we're not cool with oppression of minorities in China, and we're not going to have our names, it done in our names and with the content we create that enriches ByteDance and therefore the Chinese Communist Party. So it's either we get on TikTok, and put our messages out through there and unfortunately be a part of that CCP machine, or we get serious about national security, we get serious about moral values. If this Gen Z, goes around pretending it cares so much about the things it cares about here, why not extend that perhaps to the Uyghurs who are being oppressed by the CCP, to the people, the dissenters who are being oppressed by the CCP? How about you do something about it rather than posturing about it? And that involves, hey, guess what? You might have to delete an app off your phone. I know it sucks, but you might just have to do it.
Yeah. Well, and I hope that conservatives by and large won't wait to get involved in some of these ways that we are reaching young people. And instead of being kind of the boomer party and waiting until the young people start wanting to buy a house and paying property taxes and all this stuff before they get angry at the Democrats, rather than, going, oh, hey, everything for free is such a good idea. We need to engage, and the Democrat machine and the CCP and all of the communists have learned that really, really, really well. And if we are not doing that, then we are losing the war before we have even started to engage. So Raheem, I know I've kept you a little longer, but always so fascinating to talk with you. Some closing thoughts though on where we go from here in terms of the midterms and what conservatives should be thinking.
Yeah, well, conservatives should always be thinking about who's telling them what and why they're telling them it. And I think we lost that a little bit. I saw a lot of people on social media the last 48 hours buying into certain narratives. Remember who the messenger is, and remember to question their motives, who benefits from them telling you what they're telling you. That is rule number one of every piece of information that you ever pass. And then the other part of it is, look, that you have to be upbeat about this. I mean, there are great swathes of people waking up all over the country. Does the Democrat election machine have more to it than the Republican election machine? Sure. Do the Democrats attack each other internally less than the Republicans do? Sure. But there are also things that have gone extremely well this time around. And I think there's great lessons that have been learned over the last 48 hours. I think there are great steps to be taken to get rid of the McLeadership, and we'll be taking those steps, at least from a journalistic perspective. There are people out there who you and I both have major problems with that are in charge of organizations and conferences on the political right that don't represent the MAGA movement very well, but they do represent their own, bank accounts very well. And for the match slaps and all of those people of the world, we're coming for you as well. You are part of the McLeadership, and it has to be. This is not a time to be looking elsewhere from America First. This isn't a time to be looking outside of the MAGA movement. This is a time to realize and really come back to the founding principles of what made that movement so powerful in the first place. And that was that people weren't going to buy into these narratives anymore. They weren't, and they were happy to be called all the names under the sun and ostracized from your stupid friend group that just wants to, say nice things about people because it makes them feel better inside, but are so detached from the situation. They'd rather have high inflation and high prices than, all of this other stuff. And I just think, I look at the last, I'm usually the pessimist, right? I'm usually the cynic. And I look at the last 48 hours and I think to myself, what are we complaining about here? Like we are building something here, in midair, by the way, that is yielding results. And I say what I said at the beginning of this program, 93% endorsement success rate. When have you ever seen that before? I don't even think Obama has that, and he's the golden boy, So the point is, let's be serious, people, please. Let's be serious and think academically. And again, even though it's not necessarily in my wheelhouse, let's be a little bit sober about all of this.
So well said. Raheem Kassam, everyone should follow and subscribe to the National Pulse, to Raheem's Substack, and also follow him on all of the social media platforms except TikTok, because we're not doing that one. So Raheem, thanks so much for your insights today. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jenna.
Legacy Precious Metals is the company that I trust to give you good and patient counsel for investing in your retirement. The Biden administration has caused a financial crisis, and they have no clue how to fix it. Oil prices have skyrocketed, and when oil prices go up, not only do your expenses go up, but the cost of transportation and shipping spikes, leading the prices of goods to rise. And when and we are already seeing record inflation. That's the last thing that we need. Our economy is in trouble, and you need to take steps to protect yourself. If all your money is tied up in stocks, bonds, and traditional markets, you may be vulnerable. So gold is one of the very best ways to protect your retirement. No matter what happens, you own your own gold. It's real, it's physical, and it's always been valuable since the dawn of time. Call Legacy Precious Metals today at 866-528-1903 or visit them online at legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com, where you can download the free investor's guide. You can also go to my Facebook page, Jenna Ellis. I am a public figure on Facebook, and I just posted yesterday a really great interview with the president of Legacy Precious Metals, who is discussing why you need to start your retirement account even if you're in your 20s or 30s. There is always a great time to protect your retirement and invest, just like you want to protect your health over the long term. So go to Legacy Precious Metals at legacypminvestments.com or call 866-528-1903. MyPillow is having their biggest sheet sale of the year. You all have helped build MyPillow into the amazing company that it is today. Now Mike Lindell, the inventor and CEO, wants to give back exclusively to you, his listeners. The Percale bedsheet set is available in a variety of colors and sizes, and they are all on sale. So for example, the queen size is regularly priced at $89.98, but is now only $39.98 with our listener promo code Jenna, Jenna. So order now, because when they're gone, they're gone. The Percale bed sheets are breathable and have a cool and crisp feel. These come with a 10-year warranty and a 60-day money-back guarantee, so don't miss out on this incredible offer. There's a limited supply, so be sure to order now. You can call 1-800-564-8475 and use the promo code Jenna, or go to mypillow.com/Jenna. You can click on the radio listeners square and use the promo code Jenna. That's Jenna. Thank you so much to all of Mike Lindell's listeners and listeners of this podcast for making sure to support MyPillow and using our exclusive listener promo code Jenna. That's Jenna.